The Soul is Not a Smithy by David Foster Wallace, Part 4. There was backstory above in which the blind infant Ruth Simmons was lying in her bassinet in her tiny dark glasses, holding out her arms and crying for her mother, while the mother would stand with a glass with an olive with a toothpick in it and a downturned mouth looking down at the blind baby, and then turning and looking at herself in the room's ancient, cracked mirror and practicing giving a bitter, sardonic little curtsy without spilling her glass. Usually the baby would give up and stop crying after a while and just make small, whimpering noises. This occupied only 2 or 3 panels. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to her, Ruth Simmons's Play-Doh figurine looked almost disfigured, less like a dog than a satyr or great ape, which something heavy had then run over. Her beautiful little snow-white face with its dark glasses and hair ribbon is seen tilted upwards several degrees as she offers innocent, childlike prayers for Cubby's safe return, praying that her father has perhaps spotted Cubby huddled inside a tire in one of their seedy neighbors' unkempt yards, or has spotted Cubby loping innocently along the side of Maryville Road, and has stopped the car in the middle of traffic on the busy thoroughfare and knelt down with open arms by the side of the road for the dog to come running joyfully into his arms. Her blind fantasies, thought bubbles, occupying several of the panels that had previously been taken up by the actual scene of a frightened and limping Cubby being harried by the 2 hardened, feral adult dogs along the seedy east bank of the Scioto River, which even in 1960 was already starting to smell bad above the Griggs Dam and had rusty tin cans and abandoned hubcaps scattered along its east bank along Maryville Road, in which my father said he could remember being able to fish right out of with a string and safety pin, circa 1935, in knickers and a straw hat, with his parents in their own straw hats picnicking behind himself and his brother, who was later wounded in Salerno, Italy in World War II, and had a wooden foot that he could unstrap and take right off with its special enclosing shoe provided by the GI Bill, so the shoe was never empty, even when it was in his closet when he went to sleep, and worked for a manufacturer of cardboard dividers for different kinds of shipping containers in Kettering, in the shade of the many beech and buckeye trees that thrived along the Scioto before the university unduly influenced the city fathers into building the Maryville commuter road to more conveniently connect Upper Arlington to the west side proper. With the faithful dog's lustrous brown eyes now moist with regret at leaving the yard, and with fear because Cubby was now far, far away from home, further by far than the young little dog had ever been before. We have already seen that the puppy was only 1 year old. The father had brought him home from the ASPCA as a surprise on the previous Good Friday and had allowed Ruth to bring Cubby along to Easter services at St. Anthony's Catholic Church. They were Roman Catholics, as poor people in Columbus often were, in a small wicker basket covered with a checkered cloth from which only the dog's wet, inquisitive little nose had shown, and he had been every bit as quiet as Ruth's mother had said he better be, or else they were all going to have to get up and leave, even if it was right in the middle of the services, which for Roman Catholics would have been a terrible sin, even though one of Ruth's elder sisters had surreptitiously kept poking at one of its paws with a hat pin to try to get it to cry out, which it didn't, none of which Ruth had had any idea about as she sat on the hard wooden pew in her dark glasses, holding the basket in her lap and swinging her little legs with gratitude and joy at having a puppy for a companion. As a rule, the blind have a natural affinity for dogs, whose eyesight is not very good either. And the 2 feral dogs, whose fur was matted and their rib cages showed, and the piebald one had a large greenish sore near the base of its tail, were hard and cruel and showed their teeth at Cuffy whenever he faltered, even when they went through pools of half-frozen mud and sludge that plashed into the river out of the mouths of huge cement pipes with curse words written on them with spray paint. And even though Cuffy was just a dog and didn't have thought bubbles as you or I do, the look in his soft brown eyes spoke volumes as the piebald dog suddenly leapt up into one of these huge pipes, and its matted head and tail with the big sore disappeared, and the larger black dog began growling at Cuffy to follow into the pipe, which was not gushing, but had a trickle of something dark orange and terrible smelling, even to a dog, out of it. And in the next square, Cuffy was forced to put his little forelegs up onto the lip of the cement pipe and try to pull his hindquarters up into it with the black dog growling and chewing at his tendons. The illustrated expression said it all. It conveyed that Cubby was very frightened and unhappy, and wishing only to be back in the fenced yard, wagging its brindle tail, and waiting for the tap-tap sound of Ruth's miniature white cane coming up the sidewalk to greet Cuffy and bring him in to rub his stomach and whisper to him over and over how beautiful he was and how wonderful his ears and little soft paws smelled, and how lucky they all were to have him, as the black dog leapt easily up onto the lip of the trickling culvert behind Cuffy, and with an ominous look to either side, disappeared into the round black mouth of the pipe, completing the horizontal row. Meanwhile, in the inception of the real incident, Mr. Johnson had evidently just written "kill" on the chalkboard. The most obvious flaw in my memory of the incident as a whole is that much of the trauma's inception unfolded outside my awareness. So intently was I concentrating on the window's mesh squares, which in the narrative I was filling the next row of with panels of the unhappy mother, Mrs. Simmons, weaving the family auto slowly down the snow-filled streets of the neighborhood while she plucks at various gray hairs that she is trying to find and get a grip on with tweezers in the rearview mirror, as well as scenes of the father, outdoors in the falling snow, operating a large gas-operated appliance which looks a little like a power lawnmower but is larger and has twice as many rotating blades, as well as being the distinctive bright orange that sportsmen and hunters normally wear, which is the mansion's wealthy owner's company's trademark color, and is also the color of the special snow pants the owner makes the stoic and uncomplaining father wear, beginning to push the machine through the dense, wet snow of the mansion's driveway. The driveway is so long that by the time the father has finished snowblowing the whole thing, he will have to start back at the beginning again as the snowfall, which you can also see in the background out the mesh window of the state school for the deaf and blind classroom, even though little Ruthie, obviously is not aware, is becoming heavy and turning into a real snowstorm, with the father's thought bubble in one panel saying, "Oh well, it is not so bad. At least I am lucky to have a job, and I am certain that good old Marjorie will find Cubby in time to bring our pet home in time for Ruthie's return from school." With a patient, uncomplaining expression on his face is the loud, heavy appliance, which the mansion's owner had patented and his company manufactures, which is why he makes Mr. Simmons wear the undignified orange pants, erases the driveways white like a chalkboard being cleaned with damp paper towels by someone serving out an administrative detention. It was thus that I did not literally see or know what began to unfold during the civics class. Although I received the full story so many times from classmates and authorities in the dispatch that in memory it almost feels as if I were present as a full witness from the very beginning. Dr. Bironman, the administrative psychologist, gave his professional opinion that I was a full witness, but had been too traumatized, shell-shocked was his stated term. Each child's parents received a copy of his evaluation to be able to acknowledge the memory of it. However crude or erroneous, my role in all legal proceedings after the incident was thus limited by Dr. Bironman's diagnosis, which my mother and father assented to in writing. Such is adult memory strangeness, though, that I can still recall in great detail the sight of Dr. Bironman's nostrils, which were of noticeably different shape and size, and can remember trying to imagine various things that might have happened to his nose in life or even in his mother's stomach as a baby to produce such a marked anomaly. The clinician was very tall, even by adult standards, and I spent much of the required interview looking up at his nostrils and lower jaw. He also smelled the way someone's bath mat can smell in the summer, though I did not identify this scent as such at the time. To be frank, the consensus was that Dr. Bironman gave many of us the willies far more than Mr. Johnson, although having to watch something like that would obviously be traumatic for anyone, least of all young children.